Which punishment, either real or imagined, sounds light, or not a big deal, at first, but is actually horrific to experience? Standing on concrete. Nazis called them Stebunker. Stalin called them Kishka. But it's all the same idea. A cell so small you are forced to stand because there isn't enough room to sit. https pbs.twimig.com/media/c-1vsex.mex3.jpg. Standing barefoot on concrete for days is beyond brutal. It won't kill you, but it will, slowly and very painfully, cripple you, while keeping you awake for days straight. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law, and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff. And anybody who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunting you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law? And anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? Kneeling on grains of uncooked rice. Goat licking. In medieval times you would get your feet strapped between two wooden boards and they'd be sprinkled in salt, or similar. So animals, mainly goats, would lick them. Seems like it'd tickle at first, but they won't stop licking. Apparently they'd lick flesh off until they hit bones. Being forced to keep your arms up all the time. Getting away with a crime by pleading insanity. Instead of a definite custodial sentence you get an indefinite custodial sentence in an underfunded and terrifying medical facility. Maybe for the rest of your life. Yay. Tickling. No joke. The Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark. So it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting, and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing. So it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. Listening to the same song on loop, then skipping parts of the song. This was a form of torture used by the CIA and it's absolutely awful. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek Deep Space Nine that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation, the idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated. And he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence. Or maybe it was longer. But in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food. He was definitely deprived of social interaction. But at the end of it, he woke up, and only an hour had passed. Actually, the best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Closing your hand around a chunk of saltwater ice and holding it there, dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold onto it for as long as they can stand. It can lead to frostbite injuries similar to second and third-degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin. So if you try to open your hand, it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago. Before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Edit. With the attention this is getting, I feel obligated to say, definitely do not try this. One with that room which is so quiet you can hear your blood running. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the DFAC no more than 20 minutes after we had been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it. But your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. Has anyone seen that Black Mirror, White Christmas episode? Imagine being locked in a room with nothing. Like, really nothing. And all you have is endless boredom. That's horrifying. Solitary confinement. You'd think that isolating certain people can be good for society. But in the end it screws up your mind so bad lots of people come out worse than when they went in. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Kneeling in salt. When I was 16 my mother told me if I kept my attitude up I'd be kneeling in salt. Being a dumb kid I was like, oh whatever, it's just salt. Well, I kept that attitude up. My mom sprinkled a light dusting of salt on the tile floor in the kitchen and I had to kneel in salt for a half hour. The grains cut my knees and burned the wounds. I'm 32 now and I still have scars on my knees. I will add this before I hit reply, I know this was abuse. My mom was pregnant at the time and not in a good place mentally. My sister is now 16 and has never even had as much as a slap. Just recently my sister told me she thinks I was just a bad kid if mom did all that to me. I told my mother about the conversation after and my mother said, you weren't a bad kid. None of you were. I just had a temper and I didn't know how to control it. I'll admit, I'm an adult now with 2 kids of my own and hearing her say that made me cry on the way home. I knew in my head I wasn't a bad child. I rarely got into trouble. Never did drugs. I just had an attitude. But I hadn't realized how heavy my heart was. I was the first of 3 kids. I got the worst of it. And I always blamed myself. Even when I was finally over it and rebuilt a relationship with my mom. I blamed myself. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say that until she did. This was 3 weeks ago. And I'm tearing up just typing this. When I was around 10 years old. Being forced to stand in the corner of the living room with my parents and siblings in the room and stare at the wall for hours. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my 8 unit got in trouble. The sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment which was painting rocks. As dumb as a punishment it is. The sadistic side was that this training unit was in southern Arizona during peak summer temperatures. The rocks were literally hot enough to fry an egg on and both privates' hands ended up being covered with second-degree burns. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what. But it probably one of the most severe I had ever heard a drill sergeant receive. When visiting Africa, we learned that some places have their own form of lethal injection for criminals by snakebite. Rapists and murderers would be forced to receive a bite on both ankles from a puff adder. After officials verified the bites, they'd be sent home under supervision to spend their last days with their family. Some people thought it sounded like a more humane form. But it's not. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture. Others were more or less like, it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that. Yeah. What's the big deal? Take someone. Make them lay down and hold them down so they can't move. Pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying, by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he tapped out of it. Hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds. And finally managed to say, definitely torture, before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong.